Um, Try that again. Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to be with you all. Um, Before I welcome our panelists to introduce our speaker, who is a fantastic speaker, I'm so glad that she's with us today. I wanted to shine a little light on two local elements that have come to my attention. The first is that you may have not seen this email yesterday. UJA sends out a lot of emails, but they did send an email yesterday with numerous things that they're asking the Jewish community to do this week, especially in support of our friends and family in Israel, and explicitly to commemorate the lives of the Bibas family. And so if you didn't see that email called Be the Light in the Darkness from Adam Minsky, the head of the UJA, I would encourage you to find it in your inbox. And inside it, he mentions that you can wear orange to Shabbat this week, for instance. You can put up some social media things. You can go and do some mitzvot. You can do some learning in their honor, like we're going to do today. And I just wanted to raise all of those different elements to you because this is a moment where a lot of us feel like there is so little we can do. And I commend UJA for putting out the small little elements that a human being can do to support our brothers and sisters in Israel right now, even here in Canada on this snowy day. The second thing, and this is not an endorsement, and no, I'm not talking about the election. This is not an endorsement of any one given restaurant, but one of my friends, who is a regular at Romy's on St. Clair, shared with me that Romy's Bakery on St. Clair, which is Israeli owned and is very much like a little Tel Avivi cafe, is giving 10% of its proceeds for the next month to the Hostage Families Forum as tzedakah. And so if you want to feel like you are with your people and you want to give some tzedakah to the Hostage Families Forum and also get a bareka or a cappuccino, cafe hafuch, a challah for Shabbat. I want to raise up when members of our community are doing this kind of good tzedakah work and really give them the praise and the zechut, the merit that they deserve. So thank God for the good members of our community that are doing the right thing right now. We're very proud of them. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mark, I believe, to introduce our speaker today for Israel Dialogues.
Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you for those thoughtful comments. And it's very important that we all strive together and work together as a community to achieve the kind of things you've been talking about. We're very delighted today to have with us Orly Erez-Lukovsky, not only a well-known member of our Israeli Reform community in Israel, but also a personal friend for many of us here in Toronto at Holy Blossom. Some of you may remember that Orly was here just before the high holidays and spoke at Holy Blossom and Sinai and I think Emmanuel, if I recall. And also she spoke at Hillel down at U of T. So she really was getting around and getting the message out, and she's going to be going on she does these tours every so often, and she's just getting ready to do another one on the east coast of the US very soon. It's very important, the work that she does. Orly was graduated from the Faculty of Law at Tel Aviv University. And after clerking at the Israeli Supreme Court, she studied for a master's degree in law at Columbia University in New York City, focusing on human rights. Excuse me, Orly is a member of both the Israeli and the New York State Bar. Orly has been working as an attorney at the Religious Action Center of the Reform Movement in Israel at IRAC since 2004. She was director of the legal department of IRAC between 2014 and 2021. And in this capacity, she led the legal struggle against discrimination on the basis of religious affiliation, gender segregation in the public square, and racial incitement. Orly has led to significant legal achievements such as abolishing gender segregation on public buses, breaking the Orthodox monopoly regarding the funding of salaries of rabbis, disqualifying racist candidates from running for the Knesset, and recognizing the rights of the LGBTQ community, particularly couples, to adopt children in Israel. Since November of 2022, Orly has been the executive director of the Israel Religious Action Center. She's a member of our Reform community in Mevaseret Zion, where she lives with her family. I'm delighted to welcome you, Orly, and I'm turning it over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mark and Rabbi Kay. And it's great to be here with you, to be with dear friends, especially at difficult times. And I really appreciate hearing how much everybody cares about the hostages and about the really very difficult period that all of us have been going through in the past month, in the past weeks. Our topic today is between ultra-Orthodoxy and liberal Judaism, and specifically how Israelis relate to their Judaism after October 7th. I'll talk definitely about the issue of the hostages at the end, but I want to start by sort of giving you a little background, starting with a talk a little bit about ultra-Orthodox society and the question of how integrated it is within Israeli society, and then to move on to how secular Israelis relate to Judaism in general and to liberal Judaism in particular. So starting just with the Declaration of Independence, which is really the founding document of Israel, and the document which states the values and principles that we at the Israel Religious Action Center are working to make a reality. It's a beautiful document that promises us freedom of religion and equality in general, and in general a state which is both democratic and also the state which is the homeland of all of the Jewish people. But unfortunately, those promises have not been realized, and there is a lot of work to do in this regard, and this is what we've been doing in general at IRAC for the past 37 years. As all of you, I'm sure, know, we don't have separation between religion, state, and Israel, and when we're talking about Judaism, it is equated with Orthodoxy. And this means that the rabbinate, which is the chief rabbinate, which is part of the Israeli government, has exclusive control specifically over issues of marriage and divorce. This is really one of the most sensitive issues that we were not able to change through the courts. It requires to change it through the law of the Knesset, and for political reasons, this is not an option. And so the only marriage acceptable in Israel is a marriage through the chief rabbinate, through the rabbinical courts for Jews. And in general, the state supplies religious services, offers really Israelis Orthodox religious services through many, many rabbis who are employed by the state all over Israel, and through religious councils who administer or are in charge of administering religious services. This Orthodox monopoly also means that the Shabbat is supposed to be a Shabbat, Orthodox Shabbat, and this means we do not have public transport on Shabbat. The issue of kashrut is also the sole control of the chief rabbinate, and issues of burial are also performed in most places in Israel through burial societies who are ultra-Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox Chevrot Kadisha. We have been working for many, many years to break the Orthodox monopoly, and we've had quite a lot of victories. First of all, the state has started to fund some of our rabbis in the last 12 years. The issue of marriages, as I said, it's really hard to change the law, but what we've been doing is really the Israeli public has been voting through our feet, meaning choosing to, in practice, to marry outside the rabbinate, either through reform weddings or through other weddings which are not recognized in Israel, but nevertheless, the couples are recognized as common law couples and are therefore entitled to almost all of the rights of married couples. So in substance, there is no real difference. Our conversions have been recognized, and so even though there is a conversion system through the rabbinate, we have private conversion systems, non-Orthodox conversion systems that has been recognized for the purpose of the law of return after a very long legal struggle, and so our converts are entitled to citizenship. We also fought to allow private kashrut bodies outside the Rabbanut to be allowed to operate, and this also required a very long legal struggle. We are working to promote an option of civil burial, which the law in Israel actually promised Israelis to have this choice, but in many places we do not have this choice. And we have municipalities who are offering free shuttles on Shabbat as a way to go through the fact that there are no public transportation on Shabbat. So we see there is some kind of difference in this regard. Now, another important thing to understand when we're talking about ultra-Orthodoxy and the integration of ultra-Orthodoxy into Israeli society, or the disintegration, we have to talk about the educational system. When the State of Israel was founded, Ben-Gurion, on the one hand, opened one public law system, one public school system, which was divided between a secular one, a religious one, and an Arab one, but allowed the ultra-Orthodox to have autonomy, to have their own educational stream. And this created a lot of problems up until now, because we're talking about hundreds of thousands of kids who are not being taught the core subjects of math, English, science, and civic studies, while the girls in the ultra-Orthodox schools do study those core subjects. The boys hardly study at all. And some of the subjects, especially English, are very hard to make up when someone as an adult wants to study them. The model of the ultra-Orthodox society in Israel is a unique model that does not apply and did not happen any time in the Jewish history, and does not apply anywhere else other than in Israel. As you probably know, when the State of Israel was founded, and after the Shoah, after the Holocaust, there were hardly any yeshiva students in Israel, only 400. And so Ben-Gurion said, of course, we want to make sure that the yeshivot continue to operate. And that's why they allowed them to continue to operate, and also exempted the yeshiva students from army service. Then it was a very small number, so it didn't seem to make a difference. As we'll see soon, it grew dramatically up to today. And when we're looking at the political system, we see that since the Likud came into power in 1977, the ultra-Orthodox parties have gained since then a lot of political power, and have begun to rely heavily on state subsidies. So the whole system really began to rely on state subsidies at the end of the 70s. And the ideal of the ultra-Orthodox society is that the man, the husband, the father of the children, is studying his whole life in the yeshiva, is not working, while the woman goes out, provides for the family, and that's why the girls have to study the core subject, because she goes out and actually works. When we look at the numbers today, we have around 13 or 14% of the population is ultra-Orthodox, but when we look at the younger generations, first graders, around a third are ultra-Orthodox, and obviously this is because of high birth rate in the ultra-Orthodox society. And so when we go down with as we go to the younger generations, we see that the proportion of ultra-Orthodox society within Israeli society is much larger. As I said, a large chunk of ultra-Orthodox men are not working at all. We're talking only about half of the men that are working. And of course, the general society, the numbers are much higher, 87%. And the yeshiva students that you remember, the 400, now we're talking about 150,000 yeshiva students. Not all of them are at the age that they're supposed to go to the army, but we are talking about 60,000 ultra-Orthodox yeshiva students who are at an age that they should go and serve in the army. It's around 12,000 each year, and they're not serving in the army. We're talking about very small numbers, around 1,200 are drafted each year, so that's just 10% of the numbers each year. And as I said earlier, they rely on state subsidies. I have to say that a lot of ultra-Orthodox families are very poor. They don't get a lot of money, but they do get subsidies that allow them some kind of a living. We're talking both about yeshiva stipends. A lot of money is daycare subsidies because they have a lot of kids, and for each kid, it could be 1,000 shekels for each month for each kid, which really allows them to continue this lifestyle, and other such as the tax cuts and other subsidies. Now, this has been happening for many, many, many years. The issue of the draft or the exemption from army service of ultra-Orthodox men has been a painful issue for many years, but it has really reached a boiling point after October 7th. As you know, we have been in a very long and demanding war, multi-front war. And quite simply, the army just needed many more soldiers. There were just not enough soldiers. As you know, we had a lot of people who have served even 400 days military service during this last war. And it reached a point, thank God we now have a ceasefire, but I kept saying that we need the ceasefire even, just because we just don't have enough people, and people can't serve in the army, for so many days. It has a huge cost, both mentally, economically, and in other respects. And in order for the army to have more soldiers, the compulsory army service was extended, and because again the burden was shared just by so few people that it just became too heavy of a burden. The issue of the serving in the army of the ultra-Orthodox has been pending before the Israeli Supreme Court for many, many years. And for the third time in the last summer, the Supreme Court decided that this situation is discriminatory and cannot go on. The Knesset every time asks to pass a law that exempts them from army service, and the Supreme Court says that's unequal, that's discriminatory, and therefore it strikes it down. And the last time was, again, last June. So the court said, well, there is no law that exempts them, no law in effect. They have to be part of the army. This has not been happening since. The army did set up a new brigade, a new Haredi brigade called the Hashmonite Brigade. But you see here in the picture, those are soldiers that have been drafted in the last few months. But we're talking about like 70 soldiers that have been drafted. So the numbers are very, 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 very small. So there is no real change. At the same time, we see that the government keeps transferring a lot of funds to the ultra-Orthodox society, including transferring funds to schools that do not teach the core curriculum. This is against Israeli law because according to the Israeli law, all schools must teach core curriculum, and if they don't, then they are not eligible for state funds. We have a petition pending in this regard. And so this created a very unfair situation where you have on the one hand, the people who serve, who really carry the military burden, and the people who don't, and the people who don't get the bulk of the funds, while a lot of people who suffered bravely after October 7th did not get help at all, or just got very, low funds. And this created, of course, a lot of outrage in Israel. We now are facing a situation where the government is debating the approval of the national budget for 2025. According to the Israeli law, the government has to pass the budget, to approve the budget, the government and the Knesset, until the end of March. And if they fail to do so, then the government fails and the Knesset dissolves itself and we go to elections. And obviously for the ultra-Orthodox parties, in order for them to support the budget, they demand that there will be another law that exempts them from army service. And it's a question whether this is something that is attainable at this time with current public sentiment. We know that a few people within the government from the Likud have said that they're not going to support a complete exemption because under this new reality, this is not something that is possible. So we have to wait and see whether in the next month it's actually going to resolve itself or not. So this is sort of the side of the ultra-Orthodox and their relationship with the Israeli society as a whole. Now, when we look at the other side, the side of the liberal public, the secular Israelis, we remember that there was this saying that the synagogue most Israelis don't go to is Orthodox, or it used to be Orthodox, because most Israelis are not observant, they're secular. And a lot of people used to have just one thing in mind. When people told them, oh, a synagogue or a Jewish congregation, they would immediately think about Orthodox Judaism or ultra-Orthodox Judaism, because this was the fallback position. This was the option that was presented to them by the government for many, many years. But as time went by, and on the one hand, the reform movement became much stronger, and on the other hand, Orthodox Judaism and ultra-Orthodox Judaism became much more extreme, as we see today, right? We look at the government, we see the parties, the ultra-Orthodox parties and the national religious parties that have become very extreme, both with regard to liberal Judaism, with regard to women, demanding, modesty requirements that send women to the back of the bus or ask them to cover themselves when they board a bus. We see extremism toward the LGBTQ community, a lot of homophobic expressions and behavior toward gay and lesbian people. And we see, of course, this treatment also of non-Jews and especially of Palestinian citizens of Israel. We see a racist version of Judaism that has been associated with Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox Judaism. And as this became more and more extreme, a lot of Israelis said, well, if this is Judaism, we don't see ourselves in it. We cannot be aligned with it. And so when they presented with this kind of Judaism or nothing, they said, okay, we don't want to be practicing or associated with any kind of religious practices. And in Israel, we have a word called hadata. Hadata in Hebrew, it's becoming more religious. And this is something that has gained a lot of prominence in Israel in the last, I would say, decade or so. And the people who say, Israel is too religious, say we want to be secular. We don't want to do anything with Judaism. And it's evidence, especially in schools, in public schools, where some parents say we don't want to study any Jewish studies at all, even not pluralistic Jewish studies, because the only thing they have in mind is a very specific version of Judaism. I think it's a real problem for the other side, but this is some people really believe in this. After this government came into power in the last 2 years, we saw an attack on democracy, on Israeli democracy, that unfortunately continues to this day. And right away, we were fortunate that the Israeli public awakened and went to the streets in a really unbelievable protests that we haven't seen either in Israel or anywhere else in the world. And this pro-democracy protest of the first 9 months of 2023 was a really amazing reawakening of the liberal public in Israel that went to the streets to stand up for our values. We, the reform movement here in Israel, were part of this pro-democracy protest from the first day. And our slogan was, we defend Israel's democracy in the name of Judaism. Because we said that what the government is doing is not only undemocratic, it's also not Jewish. It's not our Judaism. And the interesting thing was that the awakening of the Israeli public was not only to stand up for the democratic values, but also for the Jewish values, saying, the government cannot take responsibility for our Judaism. We are going to take responsibility for that. We saw it quite clearly in the prayers, in the Kol Nidrei prayers in Yom Kippur of 2023, and then again in 2024, where there was an attempt to have segregated prayers in the middle of Tel Aviv, in a prominent square in Tel Aviv, to erect a mechitza, a dividing barrier, and to have a segregated prayer in Kol Nidrei. And there were a lot of people from the liberal side, a lot of secular people who came and said, no, we're not willing that in the middle of a secular city of Tel Aviv, there is going to be segregation, because this is our city, and we are not going to let others define Judaism in the secular city in this way. And on the one hand, it was scenes that were hard to watch, but on the other hand, it was exhilarating to see people who are not willing to let others define Judaism for them. We have been working for many years to offer Israelis a choice of liberal Judaism, to tell Israelis you don't have to choose between being a Jew and a liberal, you can be both. Our slogan is, there is more than one way to be Jewish in the Jewish state. And we have seen really fruits to our work. And I want to share with you a few slides showing a survey we conducted just 2 months ago, that we asked Israelis, specifically Jews, what they think about Reform Judaism. And we had quite unbelievable findings. We see that around a third of Israelis feel they support Reform Judaism. So that's around more than 2 million Israelis feel supportive and empathic toward Reform Judaism. And when we look at the different denominations or religious affiliations, we see that when we're looking about the secular Israelis, 57% support Reform Judaism. So that's huge, huge numbers who are not feeling support toward being Haredi or religious, but very much toward Reform Judaism and liberal Judaism in general. When we asked people what is their preferred prayer style, so people are saying, okay, we're not going to shul every Shabbat, but if we would have gone where we would go, then we see that 26% would go to Reform and Conservative, and 11 would go to others, while 39 would go to an Orthodox. So we see that 37% of the public prefer a non-Orthodox synagogue. And when you look at seculars, we see it's 47%. So we see that we used to say that the synagogue secular Israelis don't go to his Orthodox. Now it's a non-Orthodox synagogue. It's clear that people understand they have an alternative. And if they would go to a synagogue in high holidays, they would prefer a non-Orthodox synagogue without segregation. Again, we see here different answers about going to a synagogue without separation, without a mechitza, and we see 41% of Israeli Jews prefer to go to a synagogue without separation, and that's, by the way, an increase since 2022. It was 32%, now it's 41%. So again, here we see the number of people who would prefer to go to an egalitarian synagogue, and that's also quite impressive numbers. And another interesting thing I mentioned at the beginning, the weddings and the fact that people, even though weddings outside the rabbinate are not recognized, they still prefer to go and marry outside the rabbinate. And we see here amazing numbers that 56% of Israeli Jews, so that's a majority, prefer to marry outside the rabbinate. By the way, some of them could be Orthodox ceremony outside the rabbinate. You see 15%, they would choose Orthodox ceremony, but not by a rabbi of the rabbinate, because the rabbinate has become so extreme that a lot of Orthodox Jews even then don't find themselves aligned with the rabbinate. What happened after October 7th? First of all, we also asked in the survey about the impact of the war. And as we predicted, a majority of Israelis felt a greater need for spiritual and pastoral care. We saw this with our rabbis who were really very busy after the war. People wanted to be together, wanted to go to synagogues, and that's, of course, understandable. Right after October 7th, we started to hold Havdalah ceremonies with the hostage families. This is something that was important to us to call for the release of the hostages as the #1 priority from October of 2023. And we've been holding Havdalah ceremonies both in Jerusalem and in the Hostage Square in Tel Aviv every Shabbat since then. And we've found it's quite amazing. We call it the synagogue of the Israeli street or of the Israeli public sphere. And we have every Shabbat, hundreds of people join us in a ceremony. Some of you may have attended, where we have both a Havdalah ceremony and also songs and prayers for the hostages, and just to be together and to see how we can go on through this very difficult time. At the beginning, our slogan was from Maimonides, there is no greater obligation, no greater mitzvah than the redemption of captives. After September, when the 6 hostages were murdered, and it was clear that we could have saved them, we changed the slogan to every moment that one delays the redemption of captives, it is as if they shed their blood, because it was clear that the government is not doing enough. And the amazing thing is, and this brings us back to the relationship with Judaism, is that the strongest opponents in the government is the National Religious Party. We see here a picture of Bezalel Smotrich, and a woman a bereaved family is screaming at him why he's not supporting the hostage deal. And it's really a tragedy that people, the parties who purport to raise a voice, a Jewish voice, raise a voice against the hostages and are willing to sacrifice them. And so we have been very vocal in demanding to release all of the hostages because we believe it's really the most important thing to do now. Now, if we look ahead, up until now, in the last 2 years, we have a growing polarization within Israeli society. The outrage toward the ultra-Orthodox sector is growing. The unfairness feels very intense. The issue of the draft of the Haredim, I've spoken about. This is a challenge that has not been resolved yet. And another thing is to point about I think it happens a lot of times of crisis and at times of war. We see a growing tendency toward religiosity, meaning we see especially a lot of hostage families, a lot of hostages who said they have become more religious, really in an effort to find solace in very difficult times. The picture here that you're seeing is actually something that happened just this week in a public secular school. Kids asked to put on tefillin within the school as part of the school, and the principal refused. And so the extreme right-wing parties came and have protested. This is just a high school in Ramat Gan. They protested how come they're not being allowed to put on tefillin in a school. The only thing they forgot is that there is a religious public school system, and this is a secular public school system, and this is a feeling of coercion, of religious coercion on people who may not want to do this. So this is sort of the latest crisis here in Israel, and it really shows also the current atmosphere. It's clear, I think, among a huge majority of Israelis that one first thing to do is really to return all the hostages, to go to the second phase of the hostage deal, and to have an investigative committee in order to start a healing after a very, very, very difficult time. It's unclear whether we are going to this direction, but I hope that we will. We are going to continue to protest and to demand to go ahead with the release of the hostages, but I'm not sure it's going to be that easy. I'm gonna, I think, open it up now for questions, and I'll put here in the chat a link to our weekly newsletter. It's a newsletter I'm sending out every week, so you're welcome to sign up. I think it's a good way for you to keep updated about what's going on, about what we are doing. And another thing that's really important for me to mention is the issue of the elections to the World Zionist Congress that is happening every 5 years. It's going to happen this October. And while it's not clear still in Canada whether there's going to be elections in the United States, there are going to be elections between March 10th and May 4th. And that's a very important opportunity for us to strengthen liberal Judaism in Israel. There is a Haredi faction who is running for the Congress, and their whole mission is to really set back many of our victories and to get as many budgets as they can for the ultra-Orthodox, and to really abolish a lot of aspects of liberal Judaism in Israel. And that's a real danger we are facing. So my ask for you is to reach out to all of your American friends and relatives and anybody you know in the States. Anybody who defines himself or herself as Jew, lives in the United States, and did not vote in the Israeli elections is entitled to vote, and it's very, very important. So I'll put also a link here, and be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Orly. That was very informative, and you raised, as you always do, some really critical issues that are facing Israeli society, and also facing, confronting us as well as liberal Reform Jews in the diaspora in terms of how we relate to Israel and moving forward. So I'm going to see if, David, do you have any particular questions at this point that you want to ask? We do have a number of questions in from the audience. I'll go to David first.
Sure. Let me, I guess, ask a big question. I'm impressed, obviously, with the percentages of the survey in terms of what seemed to be some shifts in attitudes towards Reformed Judaism, liberal Judaism, as an option, a serious option of identification away from Orthodoxy. But I'm wondering how that's reflected in the core politics of the state, because so many of the things you've raised and observed um, seem to me to rely on the necessity to take action within the Knesset. There needs to be legislative changes. There needs to be not just new legislation and laws, but the capacity of the state or the political will of the state to enforce them. And this, I guess, comes back to the extent to which, in your work and the work of your colleagues, which I know has so often focused on law, and your experience in this in the leading court of the state, the Supreme Court, um, the struggle between the Knesset and the court. I know that's not the focus of your discussion, but you've had practical experience in this. And as I come back to my initial observation, for those of us who are interested in the kinds of movement that you're working towards, it seems to have to come back to a change in politics so that we see um, these attitudes reflected in stronger support for liberal parties, for the right wing and the ultra Orthodox party bloc to be broken, and for a better relationship between the Knesset and the courts in both accepting law and in enforcing it. And as I said, this is kind of a global question. So I really like your response, especially since you've had a career in working in just that area.
Yeah, so talking about the relationship between the Knesset and the court, first of all, you mentioned the fact that how we can bring about change. So legislation is one thing. We can get a lot of things done through the courts, and this is what we've been focusing on. And really, this is the mechanism that is available for groups whose rights have been infringed. And we did get a lot of achievements through the courts. Other arenas which we work in are, first of all, through municipalities. We can do a lot of things through the municipality. We don't have a federal system like in the States or in Canada, but we do have municipalities that can get things done on issues of education and of the LGBTQ rights and liberal religious pluralism. We have a lot of mayors who, because we have such an extremist government, are actually interested in assisting the liberal public, and we can get a lot of things done through them. So we have municipalities, as I said, who are actually operating shuttles instead of public transport on Shabbat. We have municipalities who have registries of common law couples who have not been married through the rabbinate, so they are registered in the municipality in order for them to be eligible for municipal benefits that are given to married couples and to common law couples. So you see a lot of mechanisms to get around. I can tell you that, of course, we have a very problematic relationship now between the Knesset and the judiciary. The judicial coup that this government has been promoting was seen to be shelved for a while after October 7th, but it is full force now back, and the government is really doing everything in the last few weeks to pass a series of laws. It's very important to oppose it, and we are spending a lot of time in the Knesset and also raising the public awareness to let people understand what's at stake, because it's very, very dangerous. And sometimes, as you said, they're just not abiding by the law, because they're saying, well, why bother change the law? We could just decide not to obey the law. That's much easier. I think we see it also very much in the States now with the Trump administration, a lot of similarities between the two countries. So that's a major challenge that we're facing. I think we have a major constitutional crisis going on for quite a while, and we have to continue to pressure the government in order to dissuade them from doing this.
Thank you. I think what I'll do is maybe go to some of the questions first and then cycle back to David and myself asking you some questions, because there's some interesting questions from the participants. Frida Muscovich asks, is it true, as reported in the Times of Israel broadcast last week, that there has been an increase of 8.5% of Haredi recruits into the IDF?
Yes, I don't know if the number 8.5 is correct, but as I said, very, very few Haredi soldiers have been recruited. Some of the soldiers that are being counted as Haredi are not real Haredi. They're being counted in order for the army to show that they're doing something, but in fact, it's still very much on the margins. As I said, with the new brigade, we just had 70 Haredi who have been recruited. Most people are fiercely opposed, and it's still considered to be a very revolutionary step for an ultra-Orthodox young man, to go to the army. I just saw this week a piece on Israel Broadcast Television about the new brigade, and most of the soldiers, their faces were blurred because they're not even willing to show their faces, because it's still considered something that's so extraordinary, so dangerous, within their sector. So the numbers are still very, very, very small. I think it's interesting to address Barbara's question, Barbara Landau, that says things that are on our mind. So if it's okay, Mark, I can relate to that. Barbara said, watch what you wish for, because there are repercussions for the draft of the ultra-Orthodox, both with who they're going to obey their commander or the rabbi, with the impacts on women's soldiers, and the impact on, I don't know if you wrote this, on Palestinians. We have seen units where Haredi soldiers were part of engaged in some violent actions in the West Bank. We are very troubled by this. I can tell you that we actually filed an amicus brief to the Supreme Court on the issue, specifically on the issue of how it influences the rights of female soldiers. We know that the army, in order to attract more ultra-Orthodox soldiers, promises them they will serve in bases where they will never see a woman their whole army service. So really, it's called like women-free bases, quite unbelievable. And we feel that as important it is to draft the ultra-Orthodox, we cannot push away women after a very long legal struggle through which they actually, there is not complete equality in the army, but a lot of military roles have been open for them. So it's clear we have a big challenge here. One of the recommendations that the Israeli Reform Movement had was to really think the right way to do it was really to open a mechina, like a pre-military program for the ultra-Orthodox, in order to prepare them to military life, because obviously it is something that is very foreign to them, and you can't overnight just take someone and put him in this totally strange and different world. So I think it takes a lot of work and preparation for this to succeed. It's not easy at all, but we have to start somewhere.
Just as a follow-up to that, what's the process? How does the IDF decide who among the Haredi they're going to draft into the army, or is it the Haredi volunteering to go in? How does that work?
So no, it's just according to age. Basically, there is an age that after which people are exempt. I think now it's 26, and that creates a problem, because people would not go to work before they reach this age, even if they don't want to go to study in the yeshiva, because if they leave the yeshiva, they have to go to the army, according to the current situation, which is problematic in itself. So it's anybody in the age between like 18 to 26 should go to the army. What the previous laws that have been struck down by the court said is that the army needs to fill quotas. Okay, there are some quotas that needs to be filled. Now people are saying it doesn't make sense, right? It has to be a personal duty of a person to go to the army like all other Israelis. So it's not a matter of quota, it should be a personal duty. And if someone violates this duty, he should have repercussions, whether it's, prison or economic, all the subsidies that would be taken from him. Now, actually, the Attorney General decided that starting on March, right, next week, people who should go to the army are not going to the army, are not eligible for state subsidies for daycare. And that's like a huge, huge sanction. So that's a major issue that the ultra-Orthodox parties are trying to change, because, as I said, without that, they cannot sustain themselves economically. So that's a huge repercussion. We have to see whether it's going to actually happen, or they'll, have something to actually prevent this or postpone it again.
Stephen Sinclair asks about Israeli Arab citizens and the relationship to the idea. Can you talk to us about that?
So yeah, Israeli Arabs are not they're not under duty to serve. Some do serve, specifically the Bedouins, the Druze serving, but it's really on their own free will. A lot of people who are against the ultra-Orthodox serving say, well, what about the Arabs? You shouldn't be hypocrite, and you should demand that all Israelis would be under a military duty. I think that what should be done is, with the Palestinian citizens of Israel, is to demand that they have some kind of a national service. I think that's the right way to do it. Some of them, by the way, do go to national service instead of army service. Obviously, the army needs soldiers, but if we would have all Israelis would either go to the army or to the national service, then I think that would be like a model that we can support and sustain.
Good, thank you. David, anything else that you want to raise? Or Les, do you have anything you want to jump in?
I'm just wondering, Orly, if you can comment just politically, and not necessarily the left wing, but the left side of politics in Israel, and what is there any developments there in terms of going forward that will balance out the right and center right governments that we keep having?
Yeah, so first of all, the big question is, first of all, when we're going to have elections. We're not due until the end of 2026. And the current government, on the one hand, does not enjoy popular support. So in every poll since October 7th, they don't have a majority. And that's why they don't want to go to elections, because they know they're going to lose. On the other hand, we have a big problem on the liberal side. We have a lot of different parties, not enough cooperation, and we don't have a lot of leaders who are charismatic enough to attract people to vote for them. We do have the merger of Labor and Meretz with the new Democratic Party that at least now it rises in the polls. So now, according to recent polls, they're the third party, largest party after I don't remember if it's like with a Bennett party, right? If Bennett is going to run according to the polls, he's going to get a lot of votes. And we have the centrist parties, I think, are a real big challenge, right? The party of Gantz and Yesh Atid, Lapid's party. I think especially with Gantz, the problem is that he's trying to attract voters from the Likud, but he's really not providing an alternative. We have a big problem with the Israeli center that has, because they refrained from actually presenting very clear views, ideological views on different issues, both the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and other issues, for instance, with the Haredim, different social and welfare issues. Because they refrained from doing so, they have really legitimized the extreme right wing, because they kept saying, well, we have to be in a very wide coalition, right? Gantz sat in the coalition with Ben-Gvir and with Smotrich, and this really legitimized racism and extremism that used to be completely out of the equation. The fact that it has now become something which is completely a legitimate partner is detrimental and created a huge damage to Israeli politics. I spoke a little about the Israeli educational system. We see the same thing in our schools. So we have the Haredi schools, we have the religious public schools, which have a very clear agenda, political agenda that is being taught to the kids. And then we have the public secular school system. And in our public secular system, we can't say anything. We can't talk about values because, God forbid, that's leftist values, right? We can't talk about human rights. We can talk about peace. And the system has become really empty of any values. And this is why we're growing a lot of kids who have no idea what democracy is, what civic citizenship is, and what values we should stand up for. And this is why we see a lot of young people voting for Ben Gvir, people who have grown up in liberal homes because they have really did not get any important education. By the way, those values are being given to kids who are going to pre-military programs, to mechinot, but not all kids are go there, just a few thousands each year. So we see a huge void in the liberal camp, in the education system, the political system that legitimizes the fringes and does not really instill in the people values or really offer them an alternative that is attractive enough for them to vote for them. And this in itself create another weakness, which really gives rise to the right wing and to the extreme right wing. And really the whole of the political system moved to the right? I mean, the Likud used to be a liberal sort of center-right party. Now it's extreme right. It's like the Jewish Strength Party. It's like Ben Gvir. And what used to be the sort of left is now center. And we really are missing, we hardly have, a liberal, now in the Knesset, a liberal Zionist party. According to Post, it's going to grow because Yair Golan, who is the head of the Democratic Party, is a very well-spoken leader. He's not afraid to say whatever he thinks. And of course, he was also a war hero because he saved so many people on October 7th as well. So we might see a change in the next elections. But we have a huge problem that we see, by the way, in many, many other places as well. We saw it now in the United States, the failure of the liberal camp to attract voters and to tell a compelling story that would convince people to vote for them. And then we have, the demagogue populist leaders who are spreading lies and fake news, but unfortunately are getting a lot of public support and then use the political power to create a lot of damage. So we have huge challenges. I think at least we now understand the challenges. Now we're trying to fix them.
If I may, what is the role of the university sector? Certainly, there had been an impression, both in the West more generally, that universities, while they encouraged broad range of debate and interests, were basically center-left in terms of accepting diversity, encouraging human rights, freedom of expression, kinds of things that were identified as core values and interests within a democratic society. In the last while, certainly here in North America, in the United States and Canada and parts of Western Europe, there's been a perception by the public that universities have become a hotbed of more extremist rhetoric and action, at least among students, and often encouraged by faculty. I'm not sure that's true, but it certainly is perceived. The university sector in Israel has been strong, though I know it's been under attack for quite a while in terms of its budgets, in terms of external influences, and I think a decrease in the percentage of university-age students in Israel who actually go to Israeli universities. So I'm wondering, where does the university sector fit if what our conversation today is not just about pluralism, but about pluralism within the notion of a re-strengthening of democracy that has the capacity to deal with variety and difference without
Yes, I
extreme.
think the situation in Israel is very different from North America. I mean, we've seen all the protests in the campuses in North America of the extreme left. It's of course very different in Israel. I think when we look at the professors, we see a very dramatic involvement in the pro-democracy protest, and now in a lot of efforts to try to block or prevent the dangerous anti-democratic legislation that the government is pushing. When we're looking at the students, there is a lot of involvement of young people in the protests. It was very evident before October 7th. The protests were led by young people, a lot of young people who were maybe for the first time really involved politically. This has changed on October 7th because naturally many of those students went to serve on reserve duty and just didn't have time or bandwidth to actually think about it. But even now, we see a lot of young people who are involved in the protests calling for the release of the hostages. So we see more political involvements with young people. Not enough since October 7th, but in this sense, I think it's very different. I think both professors and students do raise a voice for democracy. Some of the bills that the government is pushing are also aiming to weaken the academia, because really they're trying to weaken anybody that can criticize or try to impose restrictions on the government. So one of the laws that they have been pushing for is to really coerce universities to fire professors that the education minister thinks they incite to terror. So it doesn't mean that they have been indicted or convicted, just someone thinks they're not okay. They want to force the university to fire them, and if they're not firing the professors that the education minister does not like, they're going to cut the budget of the university. So obviously, it's like very dangerous to academia, to free speech, and to democracy in general. So the universities here, and I know that in North America with Trump, I mean, the whole of the research institute and universities are also he's waging war against them. So I think it's definitely one of the targets, which is very dangerous. But I'm happy to say that the professors are very, very involved in the pro-democracy protest. There is a whole forum, specifically of law professors from all over Israel who are very active. And this is something that is new. I remember for many years, we've been waging wars in the Knesset, and we kept saying, where are the law professors? And this is something that has been going in the last 2 years, and I think is very important.
Does IRIC engage the academic community specifically with programs, whether it's the students or the faculty? Is IRIC involved in that? And trying
So
to...
no, other than just giving, lectures once in a while, different courses that we're being asked, we're not involved directly with the students.
Thank you.
Really, we have a couple of other questions here. So let me bring them to your attention. Stephen Sinclair asks about the requirements for women serving in the IDF in terms of the status of women in the IDF relative to men, and is there inequality? Is there what are the various attributes that are attributable to men and women in the Army? Are they equal, and if not, why?
So in general, it used to be that the Army service of women is shorter than men, 2 years instead of 3 years. In the last few years, it's really according to the role. So if a woman elects to serve in specific roles, it might be a longer term. Obviously, combat units, women cannot be forced to go there while men can. It's a good question why it's still needed. There have been a lot of struggles actually for women who demanded to go to combat roles that have not been open to women. It took going to the courts in order for them to serve in those roles. And some of the reasoning of the IDF was that it's too difficult for women, they're too weak, they won't be able to make it. And of course the idea is just to allow any woman who passes the exams, then she should be allowed. So we see a lot of developments in this regard, but still it's not the same. So men are subject to a harsher service than women who really have the choice whether to go to combat units or to just go to any other roles. And those things are pretty dynamic. So they've been changing over the last few years.
October 7th seemed to show that shouldn't be a critical issue when you saw two tank groups of women, tank group came up from the south.
Right.
And
Yeah, we've seen rightly for the first time female soldiers who took part in active combat battle and were really very brave. And of course, we saw, a lot of female soldiers, the female spotters who were killed on the Nahal Oz base, and of course were taken captive, and some of them were murdered and some were released. By the way, it was, I know it's quite terrible, but people really feared for the fate of the female hostages. And at the end, we saw that they were actually much more treated better than the men, who are treated really much harsher. The soldiers who are now in captivity and have been handcuffed and have been starved, while the female soldiers have been treated a little less bad than their male counterparts.
Barbara Landau is asking a question about the proposed bill to levy an 80% tax on funding by foreign states for Israeli shared society NGOs, and what the effect of that might be. And
yeah, so one of the dangerous bills now, there have been a lot of similar bills in the past, and none has passed. Now the government wants to tax at a very high rate, 80%, any civil society organization who has been being funded by foreign states. It's going to apply really to NGOs on the left-wing side of the political spectrum, because the right-wing NGOs are being funded by private donors and not by states, and so it's not going to affect them. And also the bill states that courts would not deal or hear petitions filed by those NGOs. So it's really taking from people the right to use the courts. So it's dramatic. It's going to affect a lot of NGOs, human rights NGOs, especially those dealing with Palestinians in the territories, and also other NGOs, LGBTQ NGOs, environmental NGOs, and many others. I think it's important. We are now raising a voice within Israel, and also really asking any foreign governments, of course, who are friendly to Israel, to raise a voice against this. We know that some of those governments, especially in Europe, have been talking about this. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of people in the States now within this youth government that would raise a voice against this. But if anybody of you, I don't know, within Canada, that can actually oppose this, it's important, because it's it's a law that is going to endanger a lot of NGOs, which are, of course, important fabric of any democracy. So so that's one of the things that's very concerning.
thank you. I don't know if Les or David have any more questions. I have none myself, and I think we've covered pretty much all the questions from the participants. Orly, any final thoughts before we wrap up? And thank you for.
Yeah, I want to leave you with an optimistic note. I think in many places in the world, definitely Israel and the States, and I know that you have grave problems in Canada. I know anti-Semitism is very much on your mind, and other issues. We are going through a very difficult time. I know it's very hard for you also, thinking about the hostages that have been returned, especially the people who died. But we have to remember that this is not a given fate. This is something that we can work to change, and this is what we are doing together with many other organizations, together with many supporters outside of Israel, a lot of them from Canada. And we know that we're going to overcome this very, very, very difficult period. And so we really find comfort in the belief that we are doing whatever we can to keep Israel democratic and Jewish, for the benefit of both Israelis and many, many liberal Jews outside of Israel. So it's really a pleasure always to be in touch with you and to know how much you care. It's heartwarming and helps us go on. So thank you.
Thank you, Orly, and once again, we so much appreciate you taking the time from, I know it is a challenging and busy schedule, and we look forward to future engagements with you. I want to encourage everybody who hasn't already done so to sign up for the Iraq weekly newsletter that Orly sends out. It's really very important newsletter with updated information every week as to what's happening. So I encourage all of you to do that. And with that, I want to thank you, Orly. Thank you, David and Les, and all of you who participated today to be with us. At this point, we are working on some speakers for March. We haven't finalized any dates, but we do have 2 dates in April that we have finalized. So you can put this on your calendar. April 2nd, we'll have Rabbi Helmi Hirsch from the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue speaking to us about issues regarding diaspora Jewry and our relationship to Israel. And April 11th, a week later, we will have Professor Asher Susser, well known to all of us, back again to give us another update as to what's happening. So with that, I want to wish you all the best and Shabbat Shalom. And
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Orly. Thank you.
Thank you, Orly.
Thank you. Thank you.